The New Testament begins with the story of the birth of Jesus. The story of Jesus' birth takes place in 2 out of the 4 Gospels, Matthew and Luke. Now, when you read these 2 passages side by side, even though it's the same story, you're going to notice immediately a long list of differences. In fact, it's almost as if Matthew and Luke are telling 2 completely different stories. With Luke's gospel, you have, before you even get to Mary, you have the announcement about the birth of John the Baptist and everything that goes on with that in chapter 1. Then you have an angel visiting Mary, telling her that she is going to become pregnant and she is going to give birth to the Messiah. And then you have Mary running off to visit her cousin Elizabeth to see if everything that the angel told her was true. Then once she comes back, returns from visiting her cousin Elizabeth, you have the birth of John the Baptist, and immediately at the start of chapter 2, you have Joseph and Mary traveling to Bethlehem for the birth of Jesus. But when you read Matthew's gospel, the first time we see Mary, she's already pregnant. She doesn't go to visit her cousin Elizabeth. In fact, the bulk of Matthew's narrative has to do with what Joseph does with the situation, whether or not he should divorce her. How can he do so and not cause public shame to come upon her? Finally, at the very end of chapter 1, with the last couple of verses, you have an angel assuring him to take her as his wife, and he does, and they go off to Bethlehem. And then at the start of chapter 2, you have the wise men come to visit, but that doesn't take place until long after the birth. Whereas in Luke chapter 2, as soon as you have Joseph and Mary come to Bethlehem and Jesus is born, you have an angel visiting shepherds, and then shepherds going and finding the Christ child. And then after the shepherds go away, the next thing you see Mary and Joseph do is take Jesus to the temple, where he's visited by a prophet and a prophetess, Simeon and Anna. But none of those events are covered in Matthew. Matthew, when he has the wise men come and visit, they leave Bethlehem by an alternate way, avoiding returning to King Herod. You have Herod ordering the execution of all children under the age of 2 within Bethlehem. You have Joseph being visited by an angel, being told to escape to Egypt and to stay there until Herod dies. And then you have Joseph and Mary living in Egypt until Herod dies, and then returning to Nazareth, which according to Luke, they return to Nazareth after they've accomplished everything that was to be accomplished in the temple just 8 days after Jesus was born. So why do we have so many different details between 2 tellings of the same story? The main thing to keep in mind when reading Matthew's account and Luke's account is this. Both gospel authors are writing to a specific audience, and they're writing with a specific purpose. Now, because they're writing with a specific purpose to a specific audience, they're going to include certain details, and they're going to leave other details out. No gospel is an exhaustive telling about the life of Jesus. In fact, the book of John even says we left out a lot of stuff that Jesus taught and that Jesus did, but these things we have included so that you may believe that he is the Son of God. So Matthew and Luke have a specific reason to be writing what they are writing, and it has to do with who they are writing to and what do they want them to know. That means that we have to approach the Bible with this mind frame. We have to believe that the people who wrote the books of the Bible were competent communicators. Now, that might seem strange to say, but we have to understand and we have to keep in mind that if they are competent communicators, that means they know what they are doing. That means they didn't just sit down with a blank sheet of paper and just haphazardly throw down the story of Jesus' life and hope that people liked it. No, they sat down with a specific purpose. They sat down with a specific plan. They sat down and they wrote out specific details to accomplish that purpose, to speak to the people that they were writing to. In Matthew's case, he's writing to a predominantly Jewish audience. Luke, on the other hand, is writing to a predominantly Gentile audience. Now, because Matthew is writing to the Jews, he's going to portray the birth of Jesus from the viewpoint of Joseph. But Luke, on the other hand, since he is writing to Gentiles, he is free to take the story from the side and the point of view of Mary. There's a good chance Luke was going to be able to have details that Mary could provide for him. And since he's writing to Gentiles, in order to prove that Jesus is the Son of God and that this was no ordinary birth, he knew that he needed to include certain details of the story that Matthew wasn't going to include, because Matthew wanted to focus on what did it mean for a Jewish person that Jesus was the Son of God. Keep another thing in mind. As you're reading through Matthew's story, and you remember that it's written from the point of view of Joseph, think about what must be going through Joseph's mind as he discovers that Mary is first pregnant. Try to put yourself in Joseph's head and think about how he would respond to realizing that your fiancée was pregnant and you know you had nothing to do with it. Then when you read the passage that he wondered if he should divorce her and how he could divorce her without bringing public shame to her, you see the pressure that Joseph is under. Because to accept what she has done means to admit that the baby was yours, and that means you went against Jewish law. And that puts sin on you. But to claim that the baby was not yours was to accuse Mary of adultery, which was punishable by death. And in order to stay holy, in order to stay righteous under Jewish law, he would have to put her to death, and Joseph doesn't want to do that. So think about some of the questions that must have been going through Joseph's mind as all of this is playing out. Is Mary lying to me? Was the angel that spoke to me just a dream? Was it the result of wishful thinking, hoping that all of this really is the plan of God? Likewise, when you read Luke's gospel, put yourself in the mindset of Mary. Imagine as she's receiving the announcement from the angel, what must be going through her mind. Will Joseph believe me? Should I tell anybody about this? Will anybody in the world believe me? What will saying yes cost me? See, there's a very important lesson that we learn from both Matthew and Luke's narrative about the birth of Jesus, and that is this. It will cost you to obey the calling of God. But sometimes we cannot worry about what others will think about us. And instead, we just have to, in faith, say yes.